Hey guys, tonight we wander into a quiet corner of history, where dense forests cradle a sleepy town, and the air hums with the gentle rhythm of normal life. You trudge through Prypiat's tree-lined streets, the sun dipping low, painting everything in soft gold, the kind of evening that invites calm, not chaos. Yet beneath this serene facade, buried in the depths of the earth, a colossal power waits silently. It's the kind of power that can't be seen, smelled, or touched, until it's too late. You probably won't survive this, not because of flames or bullets, but because of something far more insidious and invisible. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Wherever you are in the world, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In 1970s Soviet Ukraine, Prypiat is a model town, built freshly to house the workers of a shining new symbol of Soviet technological prowess, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It's the kind of place where you can hear bird song punctuating the rhythmic clanging of factory machinery, where families gather in brightly painted apartments, and where the scent of blooming linden trees drifts lazily through open windows. Life here is unhurried but purposeful, the hum of progress beneath every step. You walk past kids playing near the river, their laughter mingling with the distant whistle of a train. The plant looms in the distance, a massive concrete giant, its 4 reactors humming steadily. To most, it's a beacon of safety and modernity, a testament to how science is bending the forces of nature for good. Yet behind the scenes, engineers whisper about the complexities of nuclear physics, uneasy about the limits of their machines. Historians still argue whether the Soviet secrecy around nuclear projects bred complacency, or if the system's sheer scale made accidents inevitable. What's clear is that beneath the surface of progress lies a fragile balance. The design of the RBMK reactor, a marvel of engineering with its own quirks and flaws, was thought safe. But this confidence was as much political as scientific. Meanwhile, life in Prypiat continues. You sense a gentle optimism, a belief in the future so typical of that era. People buy groceries, parents prepare dinner, and children dream of tomorrow. It's a quiet, almost sleepy calm that wraps around the town like a soft blanket. Outside, the forest rustles in a whispery breeze, hiding secrets neither animal nor human can yet guess. In this early morning peace, there's no hint of what's to come, a reminder that history's loudest disasters often start with silence. And you're standing at the edge of that silence, about to cross the threshold into a world where invisible dangers rewrite the story of this place forever. The night you find yourself standing by the giant steel and concrete reactor, a strange tension hangs in the air, thick and almost tangible, like the electric charge before a summer thunderstorm. It's April 25th, 1986, and the Chernobyl plant's Reactor 4 is about to undergo a test that, on paper, seems straightforward. The aim? To see if, in the event of a power outage, the turbine's spinning momentum could generate enough electricity to keep the coolant pumps running until emergency generators kicked in. Sounds reasonable, even prudent. But what you don't know is how quickly reasonable can tip into disaster. You watch technicians prepare the reactor, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, mixing with the hum of machinery. The control room buzzes with low conversation and the rhythmic tapping of buttons. Outside, the cold Ukrainian night presses against the thick windows. Inside, the human element, exhaustion, miscommunication, and tight schedules starts to weave a dangerous web. The RBMK reactor's peculiar design is a wild card. Unlike many Western reactors, It uses graphite as a moderator and water as coolant, a combination with a notorious quirk called a positive void coefficient. In simpler terms, if the coolant water turns to steam, the reactor's power output can spike unexpectedly, like a car's accelerator sticking just when you least want it. The operators, aware but not fully understanding this behavior, reduce the reactor's power output too far in preparation for the test, inadvertently setting off a chain reaction of instability. Historians still argue whether the engineer's decisions or the reactor's flawed design played the larger role in the upcoming catastrophe. Some say it was a perfect storm of human error, amplified by technical failings. Others see a systemic failure of Soviet oversight. But for now, you watch, powerless, as events begin to spiral. Minutes before midnight, the test starts. The reactor's power dips dangerously low, and frantic attempts to regain control send operators into a frenzy. Button presses multiply. Emergency protocols kick in. Yet, unknown to everyone, the reactor enters a state where even the slightest misstep could cause a runaway reaction. The air grows heavier with a charged silence, a quiet warning. In these final moments, the reactor becomes a giant coiled spring, ready to release its tension. Outside, the world remains oblivious. The workers' chatter fades to silence, nerves taut. In the control room, dials swing wildly. The tension is almost unbearable. And then, a catastrophic pulse. You won't see it, hear it in the normal way. It's a blast of neutrons and heat that ruptures fuel rods, ignites graphite, and sends a shockwave through the building. The pressure releases violently, blowing off the reactor's heavy steel lid. Steam and radioactive gases erupt into the night sky. One quirky fact: some of the earliest alarms were ignored because past tests had shown false positives. Those pesky Soviet sensors. Sometimes crying wolf. It's ironic that the very systems meant to warn became sources of confusion, blurring the line between normal and deadly. By now, the silence shatters. But this explosion isn't like the fiery infernos you see in movies. It's quieter, a roar muffled by steel and stone. Invisible clouds of radioactive material begin to swirl, carried by the night wind. Silent, deadly whispers crossing borders and borders of consciousness. You're standing at the edge of a new reality, one where the invisible can kill and where human errors meet technological imperfections with devastating results. The explosion shakes the night, though it's not the kind of blast that lights up the sky like a fireworks finale. Instead, it's a muted shudder, a tremor that rattles windows and sends a plume of glowing smoke into the dark air. You stand just outside the plant, feeling the ground vibrate beneath your feet. But the true horror is not the noise. It's the invisible cloud of radioactive dust silently escaping into the atmosphere. Inside the reactor building, chaos ripples through corridors dimly lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs. Alarms shriek, but the plant's staff struggle to comprehend the scale of what just happened. The explosion has lifted the massive concrete and steel lid off the reactor, exposing the graphite core to oxygen. The graphite ignites, feeding a persistent fire that will burn for days, each flare sending more radiation into the air. Historians still argue whether the fire's full extent was initially understood or underestimated by the Soviet authorities. What is clear, though, is that the immediate aftermath is a mixture of confusion, denial, and frantic attempts to control the invisible poison spreading outward. Outside, you watch as the fire crews, unaware of the radioactive nature of the blaze, rush toward the inferno with ordinary water hoses. Their bravery is unquestionable, their protection tragically insufficient. The radiation they absorb will haunt them in years to come. The wind picks up, carrying radioactive particles like spectral dust motes across forests, fields, and distant villages. Unlike a conventional explosion that fades quickly, This disaster breathes for weeks, spreading invisible tendrils that no one can catch or bottle. One quirky detail: some firefighters reported that their watches stopped ticking during the radiation spike, an eerie coincidence that gave rise to local legends about cursed timepieces. You might chalk it up to radiation interference, or just plain old mechanical failure. But the image sticks. Meanwhile, the night sky flickers with an eerie glow. The so-called radioactive aurora, a ghostly light show caused by ionized air molecules reacting to the disaster's radiation. For those watching from miles away, it's a haunting spectacle. Beautiful, yet ominous, as the radioactive cloud creeps outward. The first silent witnesses begin to fall ill, though no one knows yet why. Symptoms are vague: nausea, headaches, exhaustion. They're dismissed as flu or stress. You imagine these invisible injuries as whispers of a storm no one can hear. In these first hours, emergency communication lines are clogged with misinformation. The world remains largely unaware as the Soviet government delays public announcements. Historians still debate whether this delay was a calculated political move or a tragic mistake born of bureaucratic inertia. You realize the explosion has done more than break concrete and ignite fires. It has fractured the trust between a government and its people, and fractured the natural order in ways that will echo for decades. In the hours and days after the explosion, you find yourself caught in a fog of half-truths and official silence. The Soviet authorities, true to their opaque style, shuffle facts like cards, eager to downplay the scale of the disaster. It's a dance of denial and delay, one where the truth tries to slip through the cracks but is swiftly patched over. You feel the weight of this uncertainty pressing in, as though the very air is thick with secrets. Initially, local officials assure residents that everything is under control. Radiation levels? Within normal limits. Health risks? Minimal. It's the kind of reassurance that sounds comforting but feels, to anyone paying close attention, strangely hollow. You imagine standing on your porch, watching military trucks roll by, their destination unknown, while wondering if the quiet is a warning or a lie. The Soviet media remains mostly silent. No dramatic headlines, no emergency alerts. Instead, a carefully crafted narrative unfolds. Technical language, vague references to an incident, and a steady stream of reassurances. You can almost hear the whispered command from above. Don't panic. This early response becomes a masterclass in controlled information. Radiation levels are measured but kept secret. International warnings are slow to arrive. You might recall how the Swedes, detecting unusual radiation on their soil, were the first to raise alarms abroad, sparking a quiet international investigation while the Soviet Union remained tight-lipped. One quirky tidbit: the infamous doomsday button myth, claiming that Soviet operators almost triggered a full nuclear war in the confusion, is actually more folklore than fact. But such rumors spread like wildfire, feeding public paranoia and speculation. It's a reminder of how, in crises, truth often competes with myth for dominance. Historians still argue whether the Soviet government's secrecy helped contain panic or simply delayed necessary action, exacerbating human suffering. Was it political prudence or bureaucratic paralysis? The debate continues, with new evidence and testimonies emerging decades later. As the days crawl on, you witness how fear and mistrust quietly ferment. People whisper about strange illnesses, mysterious deaths. Medical workers grow uneasy, but orders remain clear: maintain calm. And so, life in Prypiat and nearby villages carries on under an invisible cloud, literally and metaphorically, of danger and deception. You can't help but think about how often history's disasters are as much about what's hidden as what's revealed. The silence after the explosion is a heavy blanket, muffling cries for help and allowing the invisible enemy to gather strength. You wake to birdsong and sunlight filtering through sheer curtains. The kind of calm morning that seems impossible after such a night. In Prypiat, families are still sleeping off yesterday's ordinary fatigue. Children fuss over breakfast, teachers prepare lesson plans, and factory workers lace up their boots. No sirens, no public alarms, just a normal Saturday morning. Except, of course, it's anything but normal. Radiation levels have spiked to catastrophic highs. But no one's told the townspeople. You stroll down a leafy sidewalk, past blooming cherry trees, watching residents line up at bakeries, walk their dogs, and chat in soft, sleepy tones. A newlywed couple poses for wedding photos beneath a tall birch. Somewhere, a bus engine hums. The town is unknowingly bathed in radiation. You can almost smell the metallic tang in the air, although you don't know whether it's imagination or reality. The grass shimmers unnaturally. Some say they could feel it in their bones, like a deep, physical wrongness. Though that might just be hindsight creeping in. At the Chernobyl plant, a different kind of panic brews. Scientists and engineers scramble to assess the damage. Helicopters fly overhead, dropping sand and boron onto the burning reactor, a desperate attempt to smother the fire and bind the radioactive particles. You look up as one circles, a distant black speck against the pale sky, leaving a shadow that seems too large for its size. Historians still argue whether these early attempts to contain the fire helped more than they harmed. Boron and sand cooled the fire, but also created a sort of crust that trapped heat below, leading to fears of a second explosion, one that could have wiped out much of Europe. That second blast never came, but the tension was real, and the danger immense. Inside hospitals, the first patients arrive. Firefighters from the initial response are now complaining of nausea, dizziness, and severe burns, not the kind caused by flames, but by radiation. The staff treat them as best they can, unaware they are being irradiated themselves with every touch, every breath. The victim's skin reddens, their eyes water. Their internal organs quietly begin to fail. Still, the city remains silent. One oddly tragic detail: a May Day parade was being planned for the following week. Banners were already printed, marching routes marked out. It said that even as radiation swept through the city, officials debated whether to cancel the festivities. Some thought evacuating would send the wrong message. And then, finally, 36 hours after the explosion, buses begin arriving. You watch as an evacuation is announced over loudspeakers, crisp voices crackling through static. This is a temporary measure. Please bring documents and essential belongings. You will return in 3 days. The reassurance sounds scripted. Nobody realizes they are leaving their homes forever. The buses roll through the streets like patient beasts. You board one, joining families clutching pets, elderly neighbors, and quiet children. As the city recedes through the window, you see a dog trotting behind the bus, confused. You want to open the door for it, but you don't. Historians still debate why the evacuation took so long, whether officials truly underestimated the danger or prioritized order over safety. Either way, the result is the same: exposure on a massive scale, irreversible and invisible. You leave behind a city that looks intact, but is already doomed. The reactor smolders behind you. The birds keep singing. But something deep inside the soil, the trees, and the wind has changed. And you, too, are changed, though you won't know it for days. You ride in silence, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, the bus rumbling down the road like it's fleeing something it doesn't fully understand. Around you, no one talks much. A woman clutches a sleeping baby. A boy fiddles with a toy tank. You hold on to the metal bar in front of you, watching the city of Prypiat shrink into the morning haze. The driver doesn't say a word. The silence becomes its own kind of soundtrack. You pass checkpoints and fields, the latter looking deceptively tranquil. From a distance, the countryside seems untouched. But you now know the truth. The grass you used to picnic on is laced with cesium, the forests humming with isotopes that will linger for hundreds of years. Everything looks normal, but you no longer trust your eyes. At your evacuation point, you're processed quickly. Name, ID, destination. You're told this is all temporary, that you'll be home in a few days, once the situation has stabilized. There's a strange sense of polite urgency. Officials wear stern faces, but they never quite meet your eyes. You wonder what they know that they're not telling. Back in Prypiat, the streets begin to empty. Belongings are left behind, meals half-eaten on tables, radios still playing music, slippers beside beds. Pets scratch at doors. Goldfish swim in tanks, unaware they'll be the last ones left behind. The silence spreads like mist. One oddity from these hours. Later, scientists measuring radiation found strange hotspots in puddles and roof gutters, places where rain and soot funneled radioactive particles into small, intense clumps. These microzones could deliver a fatal dose in minutes. You imagine skipping through a puddle as a child, not knowing it's quietly burning through your future. Historians still argue whether the return in 3 days line was a calculated lie or genuine wishful thinking. Maybe both. It's easy to underestimate radiation. It doesn't smell. It doesn't smoke. You feel fine until you don't. Meanwhile, the Soviet military mobilizes. Trucks rumble into the zone, loaded with conscripts and scientists. Helicopters whirl above the reactor site in tight rotations. Men in simple cloth masks are ordered to shovel graphite from the roof. Graphite so radioactive it glows faintly in the dark. They're told it's just debris. Most will later suffer radiation sickness. Some won't live to see the next year. And yet, there's a kind of grim efficiency. The disaster zone begins to take shape. Zones are drawn, 10 kilometers, 30 kilometers, then a zone of alienation that will expand over the coming weeks. You hear the phrase whispered among officials, liquidators. These are the men and women conscripted to clean up the mess, to bury what can't be fixed, to erase what can't be acknowledged. One of the stranger assignments? Bulldozing the topsoil. Whole fields are scraped down and buried, sometimes with entire houses or machines still inside. You picture a bulldozer slowly swallowing a farmhouse, its red paint still bright beneath the dust. Elsewhere, rumors begin to surface. Foreign embassies report whispers of something gone wrong near Kiev. Scandinavian weather stations detect a mysterious radioactive cloud drifting westward. But the Soviet Union, proud and closed off, continues to minimize the news. Official statements mention a fire. No word yet on fallout, evacuations, or what might still be burning. The world holds its breath, unaware that one of history's worst nuclear disasters is already well underway. By the end of April, you're no longer just a displaced citizen. You're a quiet witness to one of the strangest, most paradoxical episodes in modern history. The Chernobyl disaster is both a secret and an open wound, visible in the skies but muffled underground. As the days stretch into weeks, the Soviet government begins releasing carefully managed statements. You find yourself clinging to each word, hunting for truth between the lines. And finally, on May 1st, under mounting international pressure, the news breaks. In the most Soviet way possible, you're seated in front of a black and white television, its screen flickering with the usual May Day parade coverage. Then, buried between cheerful reports about agricultural yields and synchronized flag waving, comes a brief announcement. A minor incident occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power station. Contained, controlled, nothing to worry about. You blink, that's it? But word is spreading beyond the Iron Curtain. Sweden, Germany, the UK, international radiation monitors are lighting up with red flags. A radioactive cloud has drifted over Europe, uninvited and unavoidable. For once, the outside world is telling the Soviets what's happening inside their own borders. Historians still argue whether the Soviet leadership truly believed they could manage the optics, or if they were simply buying time to avoid global shame. You lean toward the latter. The USSR was never fond of admitting flaws, especially not ones that glowed in the dark. One odd moment from this PR debacle. Soviet news outlets were still airing feel-good stories about reactor safety even after Chernobyl blew. A children's science show called Fascinating Science ran an episode on the peaceful atom just days after the explosion. Irony, it seems, has a long half-life. Outside the USSR, the press goes wild. Western headlines scream nuclear meltdown, Soviet secrecy, and radiation cloud over Europe. Some articles speculate about thousands of deaths. Others muse darkly about World War III, fearing the explosion was part of a military mishap. You, meanwhile, just want to know if it's safe to drink the milk. That question, it turns out, is far more complicated than you'd think. Radioactive iodine, one of the byproducts of the explosion, has contaminated pastures across the region. Cows graze peacefully, chewing on fallout-dusted grass, unaware they're turning into four-legged Geiger counters. The iodine collects in their milk, then goes straight into baby bottles, cereal bowls, and school lunches. One fringe report from Belarus even claimed that local authorities encouraged children to drink more milk after the accident to strengthen their bones. Historians call this a translation error. You're not so sure. You picture school cafeterias in Gomel and Kiev, trays lined with steaming soup and fresh yogurt, and feel a shiver climb your spine. Sometimes survival doesn't hinge on heroics. It hinges on what snack you reach for. Back at the plant, things aren't exactly under control. A thick, toxic slurry of melted uranium, graphite, sand, and steel, cooled into a lava-like substance, has begun to form beneath the reactor. You'll later hear it called the elephant's foot. It's dense, steaming, and lethally radioactive. Just being near it for 5 minutes can deliver a fatal dose. And yet, workers descend into the bowels of the facility anyway, trying to drain water from the lower chambers to prevent a second explosion. These men aren't superheroes. They're electricians, engineers, and plumbers, called in, suited up, and sent underground with no guarantee they'll return. Many do. Some don't. All of them understand what's at stake. The outside world watches as the Soviet facade begins to crack. Just slightly. International nuclear agencies send experts, demand transparency. Journalists press for photos. And slowly, reluctantly, the government allows a sliver of truth to escape. But even now, everything is wrapped in euphemism. The word meltdown is avoided. So is radiation sickness. Instead, you hear about thermal events, structural instability, and localized health anomalies. You chuckle. Grimly. You've seen what those anomalies look like. By mid-May, evacuation zones expand. Villages across Ukraine and Belarus are emptied. You watch on television as entire communities vanish into convoys. Men with Geiger counters inspect everything. Clothes, cows, even cats. If it clicks too fast, it gets left behind. It's a strange mix of the meticulous and the absurd. One military team is tasked with removing the radioactive topsoil from a kindergarten playground, then stacking the dirt into neat piles for burial. Another is told to wash radiation off of trees using hoses and sponges. Historians still argue whether these efforts were brave, foolish, or both. You suspect the answer lies somewhere in the fog between desperation and hope. And above it all, that ruined reactor still smolders, like a wounded god breathing poison into the sky. The weeks blur. Time stretches strangely in exile. You're staying with relatives now, or maybe in a drafty state dormitory. Your clothes folded into a suitcase that still smells like home. On some days, you catch yourself forgetting, just for a moment, what you've lost. Then you hear a Geiger counter crackling on the news, or see someone cough into a blood-stained handkerchief, and everything snaps back into focus. Meanwhile, back at the Chernobyl plant, something unsettling is forming beneath the ground. A molten, half-cooled mass of uranium, graphite, and structural debris. Engineers call it corium. You know it better as the elephant's foot, a nightmarish blob so radioactive that standing next to it for just 60 seconds was once enough to cause dizziness and internal bleeding. If you were unlucky enough to hang around for 5 minutes, well, let's just say you'd be sleeping forever. The elephant's foot lurks in the plant's basement, a dark stalactite of doom. It's hot, pulsing faintly, and terrifyingly dense. One early photo of it, taken by a remote camera on wheels, shows a shadowy mound of what looks like tree bark soaked in ink. It's not bark, of course. It's the concentrated fury of the melted reactor core, and it's still quietly simmering. Oddly, the very thing that makes it terrifying also saved everyone. The foot eventually cooled and hardened, slowing the release of radiation. But no one knew that at the time. You imagine being one of the first people sent to photograph it, camera shaking in your rubber-gloved hands, your supervisor yelling at you to hurry. Every second in that tunnel adds years to your biological age. Historians still debate just how close the plant came to a second catastrophic explosion. Some argue that if the molten core had reached the underground water reservoir, the result would have been a steam explosion powerful enough to flatten much of Europe's northeast. Others say the danger was overblown. But you don't feel comforted either way. And above ground, a different kind of war is waging. The war against dust. You wouldn't think dust could be so dangerous, but radioactive particles are tricky like that. Once they settle on surfaces, leaves, rooftops, windowsills, they hitch a ride on the wind. The rain, your shoes. That's how entire villages stayed toxic long after the fires stopped. So, the military does something unusual. It declares war on the trees. Helicopters fly low over the red forest, the pine woods immediately adjacent to the reactor. Once vibrant and green, the forest turned a rust red within days of the explosion, scorched from the inside out by gamma radiation. It's beautiful in a way. Haunting, almost autumnal. But every needle on those branches glows with silent danger. So they bulldoze it, all of it. You stand on a ridge months later, looking down at the flattened wasteland where trees once swayed. The soldiers buried the trunks in trenches, stacked like firewood, then covered them with thick earth. It doesn't make the land safe, not really, but it makes it quieter. Elsewhere, crews begin washing down apartment buildings with soapy water and long-handled brushes. Soldiers wear makeshift hazmat suits, plastic capes and cloth masks, and carry water tanks on their backs like pesticide sprayers. They're told the effort is symbolic more than scientific. Radiation doesn't wash off like dirt, but it helps public morale to see action. In one bizarre twist, local officials consider hosing down roads with glue. The idea? Sticky particles stay stuck. It sort of works, but now the streets of Prypiat gleam like someone spilled syrup everywhere. Your sleep is uneasy. You dream of your apartment, abandoned and frozen in time. Your slippers still by the door. The pot of soup still on the stove. One survivor later recalled how their family's pet parakeet was left behind when they finally returned in a cleanup crew years later. The cage was empty, but the toy bell still swung gently. It's the details that haunt you. Odd rumors start to circulate. People whisper about two-headed deer seen near the exclusion zone, glowing mushrooms in the woods, and birds that don't sing anymore. Most of it is nonsense. But you can't help wondering, what if some of it isn't? Even scientists begin to disagree. Historians still argue about the long-term genetic effects on local flora and fauna. Some studies show mutations, others suggest rapid adaptation. You read about radioactive boars roaming through German forests, descended from Chernobyl escapees, and wonder what else might have wandered farther than expected. Yet amid all this devastation, something quietly miraculous begins. Nature returns. Without human interference, the zone begins to bloom. Wolves prowl the empty roads, lynx tiptoe through the ruins. Wild horses, the rare Przewalski's horse, are introduced to the meadows and thrive. It's as if the land, poisoned and abandoned, is gently reclaiming itself. And you realize the absence of humans may be the greatest gift Chernobyl gave the Earth. You're still not allowed back home. Weeks turn into months, and you begin to feel like an exile in your own country. Your belongings, your photographs, your unwatered houseplants, they're all locked behind the invisible barrier of contamination. The authorities call it the exclusion zone. But to you, it's just absence, an outline where your life used to be. Then comes a whisper, barely a rumor at first, passed from neighbor to neighbor. Some people are sneaking back in. They're called the Samosli, the self-settlers, elderly villagers, mostly women, who've had enough of crowded shelters, government soup, and the taste of other people's soap on communal towels. These women, many of them war widows, some with stoic babushka faces and kerchiefs tied tight against the wind, quietly cross the checkpoints and return to their villages within the zone. You don't blame them. What's a little radiation compared to dying alone in a concrete dormitory? The Samosli plant potatoes in contaminated soil. They boil water from radioactive wells. They feed chickens that peck at dusted earth. And they survive. Historians still argue whether this resilience is bravery or denial. You suspect it's both. One researcher noted that many of the returnees lived longer than those who remained in evacuation camps. Maybe routine matters more than we know. Or maybe, after a lifetime of hardship, their bodies simply ignored the poison out of habit. The government is conflicted. Technically, these people aren't supposed to be there. But who wants to be the official that arrests a grandmother for growing cabbage on ancestral land? So authorities mostly look the other way. A quiet understanding emerges. Stay within your own ruins, and no one will bother you. You picture one Samosil woman sitting on her porch, sipping tea from a chipped mug, Geiger counter softly clicking like a metronome. Her garden is vibrant, if oddly symmetrical. The cat looks healthy. The vegetables grow big, perhaps too big. But she smiles at you as if to say, "You see? The earth remembers me." The rest of the zone, meanwhile, is becoming something between a science lab and a ghost town. Research teams arrive in caravans. They study soil, insects, birds, and, of course, human impact. You read about a team that tags wolves with GPS collars, only to discover that the animals have adapted perfectly to the irradiated ecosystem. No people, no cars, no hunters. Sounds like paradise to them. Tourists begin to trickle in. Yes, really, tourists. At first it's journalists, camera crews, or foreign scientists. Then, the novelty seekers. People who pay to walk through the abandoned city of Prypiat, to take selfies in front of the rusting Ferris wheel, to touch the cracked classroom desks where schoolchildren once drew smiley suns in the margins of math books. There's even a story, probably apocryphal, about a man who proposed to his girlfriend under the reactor's shadow. Romance is not dead, you think. Just glowing faintly. The guides have their lines rehearsed. This is the Prypiat amusement park, which never officially opened. Over here's the Azure swimming pool. Don't touch the water. It's mostly memory now. And here, in this high-rise window, you can see an abandoned pair of shoes. No one knows who left them. You imagine being on one of those tours. You'd want to ask, did anyone survive here not just physically, but emotionally? Or did we all just scatter and grow strange in different places? The line between tragedy and attraction becomes blurry. Filmmakers shoot documentaries, writers scribble in notebooks, and YouTubers narrate their shaky videos with phrases like, "It's eerily peaceful, bro." You roll your eyes, but you watch anyway. Then comes the cleanup phase with the most ominous name of all, liquidation. The liquidators, hundreds of thousands of them, are conscripted soldiers, miners, firefighters, and factory workers sent to decontaminate the site. They're armed with shovels, brooms, lead aprons, and orders. Their mission is to scrub the impossible, to clean a place that will remain unsafe for centuries. Some work on rooftops, sweeping graphite debris off with makeshift tools. They're exposed to some of the highest radiation levels in the entire event. The first batch of robots failed, either from malfunction or sheer dose, so humans had to take their place. Some wore lead armor, which slowed their movements to a near-comedic crawl. They were given nicknames like bio-robots. You wonder if they laughed, or if they were too busy counting seconds before retreat. Historians still debate the true number of liquidators. Some say 600,000, others closer to 1 million. Most agree they weren't properly warned. Many wore nothing but cotton uniforms and gauze masks, as if they were scrubbing a dirty oven, not the aftermath of a nuclear detonation. Yet they kept showing up, because that's what people do. One fringe anecdote says some liquidators made a game of collecting radioactive souvenirs, glowing rocks, melted metal, thinking it was all exaggerated. Those objects now sit in attics, forgotten and humming quietly through the years. And amidst all of this, the Soviets make a decision to encase the reactor. They call it a sarcophagus, though there's something uncomfortably alive about what's inside. Giant cranes drop steel panels and concrete slabs over reactor Nota 4, building a tomb with bolts and dread. It's meant to last 30 years. You'll later find out it started crumbling after 10. But at the time, it feels like closure. A lid on the nightmare. You lie awake one night, decades later, thinking, what happens when the lid comes off? By now, the disaster is becoming folklore. You overhear it in quiet stories told around campfires, in weary vodka-fueled toasts, in children's bedtime tales that end with kt. And that's why we never eat mushrooms near the fence. You catch whispers in the markets, too. Traders selling Chernobyl apples with a sly grin. Buyers pretending not to care that the fruit glows just a little too red. Years pass, and you begin to hear a strange word whispered among bureaucrats and engineers alike. Containment. It's a delicate word, one that tries very hard not to mean burial, because reactor No. 4 is still there, still humming, still exhaling tiny, invisible breaths of radiation beneath the heavy sarcophagus. And now it's cracking. The sarcophagus, hastily built in 1986 by exhausted crews on scaffolding barely stable enough for birds, is no longer doing its job. You picture it like a rusting helmet over a sleeping monster. Rain has begun to seep through the seams. Snow melts find their way in, and inside, the elephant's foot still smolders, quiet but eternal. So, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, plans form for a new solution, a real one this time. Something grand, something durable, something they call the new safe confinement. It looks like an airplane hangar made by the gods. Massive, gleaming, curved like a silver dune. You could park the Eiffel Tower inside it with room for a gift shop. And it's being assembled not on the reactor but next to it, because it's too dangerous to build over top. When finished, it will be slid over the old sarcophagus on special tracks, like an enormous steel shrug. You marvel at this. Humans building a building to cover a building to contain a disaster that started with a design flaw. Historians still argue about how close the new confinement came to failure during its assembly. Some claim a few miscalculations nearly caused structural instability. Others dismiss that as alarmism. Either way, the structure was completed. And in 2016, 30 years after the explosion, it was finally pushed into place. And just like that, the beast is caged again. But let's rewind just a little. Between the two sarcophagi, between the first slapdash coffin and the glorious silver ark, you live through a time of limbo. The Soviet Union collapses, borders shift, flags change. Suddenly, you're not a Soviet citizen anymore. You're Ukrainian, or Belarusian, or maybe Russian, depending on where your street ends. Chernobyl, once a state secret, becomes an international riddle. Western scientists arrive with clipboards and cautious curiosity. You meet them sometimes in dusty hallways, their white lab coats flapping like sails. They ask about your exposure, your symptoms, your family history. They say things like genetic markers and cellular damage. You nod, pretending to understand, all while wondering if your unborn grandchildren will have webbed fingers. Life inside the exclusion zone becomes eerily stable. There's a Chernobyl police department. A few hundred workers rotate through to maintain what's left of the plant. They call it the shift town. People work 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. It's like the world's most radioactive timeshare. You imagine waking up there, breakfast in a prefab dorm, coffee too hot, boots laced tight. You check your dosimeter before heading out. Its green screen blinking calmly. For now. Outside. The wind stirs dust on empty roads. No birdsong, no honking horns, just the whisper of leaves. Maybe the distant creak of a playground swing. And still, tourists come. They ride buses into Prypiat, their cameras clicking like insects. Some wear full hazmat suits, more for the photo than for protection. Others come in jeans and ironic t-shirts that say things like, radioactive and ready. You sigh? Everyone wants a selfie with the Ferris wheel now. The most popular sites are odd. The school, with its scattered gas masks littering the floor like Halloween confetti. The hospital, where the fireman's gear still sits in the basement, too radioactive to move. The apartment blocks, where calendars still hang on walls, always stuck on April 1986, like the building itself refuses to acknowledge time has passed. And yet it has. One day you return. You're older now, maybe retired. You're given a visitor badge and a flimsy mask, and they let you through the checkpoint. You step onto the cracked sidewalk of your childhood. The buildings are gray and broken, but the breeze smells faintly of pine. A fox watches you from the shade of a bus stop. It doesn't run. Inside your old building, the elevator shaft is a dark wound. You take the stairs, 4th floor, apartment 48. You knock, out of habit. Of course. No one answers. You open the door and step inside. Your wallpaper is still there. The faded pattern of sunflowers. Your bookshelf leans drunkenly against the wall. On the floor, a toy truck lies on its side, mid-journey across a rug hardened with dust. You sit on the edge of the bed, the mattress sighing beneath you. Somewhere downstairs, something creaks. Not a ghost, just the wind. Probably, the silence is heavier than the dust. You leave a note in the mailbox. I came back, it says. I remembered. No one will read it, but you needed to say it. The exclusion zone no longer feels like a wound. It's become a scar. Quiet, persistent, oddly dignified. The fences still hum with warnings, but now they're more about liability than fear. Tour buses drive past them daily. Scientists slip in and out through designated checkpoints. Somewhere in the woods, a group of wild horses gallop past an abandoned kindergarten. Yes, horses. Specifically, the Przewalski's horse, those short, stocky, semi-wild descendants of an ancient line. They were introduced in the 1990s to study how large mammals might adapt to radioactive habitats. You expect tragedy. Instead, they thrive. Turns out, nature doesn't care much about your warnings or your barricades. Without humans to interfere, flora and fauna have reclaimed the zone in a sort of eerie, post-human flourish. Birch trees push through concrete staircases. Vines wrap around street lamps. Boars, lynx, moose, all making themselves quite at home. Historians still argue whether this is proof of resilience or just an illusion of health. Yes, the animals are back. But are they okay? Some researchers find strange mutations. Others insist these are overblown. You read one study suggesting the birds sing differently now, softer, maybe shorter songs. Radiation, it seems, can affect your tune. But you're not a bird. You're someone who lived here, fled here, maybe even lost someone here. And now, in this moment of odd stillness, you find yourself asking, is it healing or is it hiding? The newer generations know Chernobyl as history, not memory. To them, it's a strange word in a textbook, a destination on the edge of Instagrammable ruin. You hear teenagers giggling near the Prypiat pool, filming clips with hashtags like fun nuclear vibes. You chuckle, but something in your chest tightens. In 2019, the story gets a reboot. HBO airs a miniseries called Chernobyl, dramatizing the events in brutal, atmospheric detail. Suddenly, interest in the disaster surges again. The world remembers. Visitor numbers spike. Memes emerge. Quotes from the show, grim, powerful, go viral. What is the cost of lies becomes a new kind of anthem. People who never knew where Chernobyl was can now describe reactor Nobern 4's control room with eerie accuracy. You can almost hear a studio executive saying, "Radiation cells," and yet, part of you is grateful. Because people are finally talking again, not just about the explosion, but about its consequences. The silence is cracked, like the old sarcophagus did. You recall a scene from the show, the helicopter crash, the graphite on the rooftop, the miners digging a tunnel in their underwear. Some of it's dramatized, of course. Some facts are bent for effect. Historians still debate what's accurate and what's just screenwriting. But the feeling, that cold, inevitable dread, is right. The show becomes a cultural touchstone. University classes teach it alongside real accounts. Fans make pilgrimages to the zone. Guides update their scripts to include "as seen on TV" nods. You even see merchandise, shirts with the word "comrade," mugs shaped like reactor domes, candles that smell like ash, hopefully not plutonium. And through all this renewed attention, the truth keeps evolving. In 2020, a fire sweeps through parts of the zone. It's not nuclear this time, just nature doing what nature does. Dry brush, careless sparks, wind. Smoke billows over the pine trees, and people panic. Is something dangerous being stirred? Are the ashes radioactive? Authorities assure everyone that levels remain safe, but dosimeters tick a little faster for a while. You wonder, maybe this place will never be safe in the way people want it to be. Maybe safety is a moving target, a concept designed to make governments feel productive. That same year, a newer generation of researchers proposes another theory, the Chernobyl fungi. Apparently, a strain of black mold growing on the inside walls of the reactor appears to feed on radiation. Not just survive it, consume it. You blink, the fungus contains melanin, like in human skin. Some scientists suggest it converts gamma rays into energy through a process similar to photosynthesis. You think of it as a gothic plant, growing in shadows, basking in terror. A little ecosystem of nightmares finding a way to bloom. Fringe tidbit? Absolutely. But intriguing. There's even talk about sending this fungus into space to shield astronauts from cosmic radiation. You picture that for a second. A spacecraft lined with black mold from Chernobyl, soaring toward Mars like a fungal cathedral. What a strange legacy. Meanwhile, a handful of original survivors are still alive, though fewer each year. The Samosli tend their gardens. Some now have satellite dishes. One even hosts a blog, Spotty Connection. But she posts her pickled mushroom recipes and tells visitors not to step on her beans. You think, if the world ends, this woman will still be making borscht. And far below the surface, the elephant's foot still rests. It's less volatile now. Cooler, but not harmless. It remains unmovable. Too dangerous to touch. Too sacred to forget. Tourists can't visit it. Scientists rarely do either. It's become a symbol, a myth, a kind of anti-relic. Pilgrims of a darker faith might stand in its presence and whisper, "Here lies the cost." You sigh and rub your temples. There's so much to carry from this place. The weight of misinformation, the burden of silence, the ripple of decisions made in panic and politics. And yet, against logic, against decay, there's life. Insects buzz, trees grow. The red forest turns gold again each autumn. Wolves raise cubs in buildings that once held blueprints. And somewhere in the zone, a child born after the disaster finds an old swing and decides to sit, gently rocking under a sky that forgets nothing. You smile, despite everything. You wake to silence again. No sirens, no Geiger clicks, just the quiet rhythm of wind threading through tall grass. The world hasn't ended. Not today. And here, in the strange rebirth of Chernobyl's zone, that almost feels like a victory. By now, you've gotten used to paradoxes. The place that once threatened to poison the planet has become a strange sort of sanctuary. There are no skyscrapers, no factories, no honking cars, just rust, ruin, and the gentle sound of nature tiptoeing back in. But don't get too romantic. This is not Eden. You step into an old train station, ivy curling along broken tile, a half-crushed suitcase lying under a bench, its contents scattered like the thoughts of someone who had to leave in a hurry, a child's mitten, a rusted can of condensed milk, a newspaper with that same headline, again and again, "Accident at Nuclear Power Station." And yet, even among the rot and dust, you notice something deeply human. Someone has stacked bricks into a little hearth in one corner. Someone tried to stay warm here. You touch the cold stones. You picture them bending over this improvised campfire, breath misting in the air, eyes watching shadows that never really leave. The official story is stable now. The new safe confinement has been in place for years. A titanium giant crouched silently over reactor number 4. Maintenance crews still rotate in and out. Funding trickles from international donors. There's talk of decommissioning the entire plant, though everyone quietly admits that complete cleanup is a fantasy, not a plan. Historians still argue whether Chernobyl was truly the death knell of the Soviet Union. Some say it was inevitable, that the system was already crumbling. Others point to the explosion as a final, humiliating crack in the facade. Trust collapsed, along with the reactors. You can only prop up lies for so long before they ignite. In the wake of that collapse, Ukraine inherits the zone, and with it, a strange inheritance of duty and tourism and trauma. You cross paths with one of the younger guides. Her name is Anya, born in Kiev after the accident, raised on cautionary tales and iodine tablets. Now she gives walking tours of Prypiat in 3 languages. She jokes that her generation's superpower is knowing exactly how long you can stand near a particular pile of rubble before your badge starts buzzing. She leads you through the old cinema, past broken reels and velvet chairs bloated with mildew. A pigeon flutters overhead. Anya stops to tell you how the screen was showing Siberia Day the night before the explosion. A long, slow Soviet epic. Very boring, she says with a grin, but not radioactive. You admire her humor. It's the kind that grows in places where the soil is hard and the truths are harder. Outside the theater, you pass the old hotel, Hotel Policia. It looms over the square like an empty crown. The rooftop once held spotters during the cleanup, trying to judge the danger with binoculars and blind hope. Now, it's just a ruin. The elevator shaft gapes open like a mouth. A sapling grows where the concierge desk used to be. You step through the lobby and back into the sunlight. The trees are taller than you remember. Maybe they've always been taller, and you've simply grown smaller in spirit. There's an owl perched in a traffic light. Just one, watching you. You don't speak, neither does it. In a place like this, the line between myth and memory blurs easily. Locals speak of the black stork, a creature said to haunt the forests around Reactor No. 4. Long wings, silent flight, appears before disasters. Some say it's just an old bird, its feathers singed by exposure. Others claim it's a ghost of one of the liquidators. You smile politely when the story is told, but you find yourself glancing upward more often than usual. And there's the strange case of the zone's clocks. Many were stopped at 1:23, exactly the time of the explosion. But others have moved. Tick, tick, tick. Some even seem to run backward. You know it's just a mechanical quirk. Still, you can't help but feel like time misbehaves here. Even gravity seems inconsistent. You climb a staircase in an abandoned school, each step creaking like a guilty conscience. Halfway up, you spot a desk suspended from the ceiling by vines, as if the building flipped its own blueprint and forgot to tell reality. You reach the roof. The view is breathtaking. A sea of trees, concrete poking through like the bones of a buried colossus. Far off, the dull silver of the new safe confinement gleams like a spaceship. It's easy to forget how dangerous it all still is. You sit, breathe, feel the wind on your face. There's a line painted here, half faded. To stand still is to fall behind. You wonder who wrote it. Maybe it was graffiti, maybe it was policy, maybe it was both. For a place that stopped everything, Chernobyl seems determined to keep moving. At the edge of the zone, near a checkpoint, someone has set up a cafe. Yes, a cafe. Bright umbrellas, Wi-Fi, potted plants suspiciously healthy for being so close to radioactive soil. You drink instant coffee that tastes vaguely of nostalgia and powdered milk. The barista plays synth music from an old cassette deck. Something Ukrainian, something haunting. He tells you he used to be an engineer. Now he sells postcards that say, "Greetings from the zone." You ask him if he worries. He shrugs. No one lives forever. And then he hands you a sticker with a cartoon of a glowing squirrel. "You want 2?" he asks. They're lucky. You take 3, because why not? You return to the edge of the red forest, where the trees burned from the inside out during the first days of the disaster. They still stand, sickly, stooped, and brittle, like elders who remember too much and say too little. No birdsong here, no wind even. Just that heavy, unnatural silence that hangs in the air like breath you forgot to exhale. A guide tells you not to linger. The soil beneath your boots remains toxic in the most persistent way. Radiation half-lives are long, and this forest, despite all appearances, is very much alive in its own ghostly way. Some scientists joke that it's like a garden tended by entropy itself. You trudge further, passing warning signs with the familiar black and yellow trefoil symbol. There's something oddly bureaucratic about radiation. It's invisible, deadly, and deeply procedural. You wonder who replaces these signs. Who decides when they're too faded to warn anyone? Who dares to drive the stakes into the contaminated earth? It's here that you spot something that shouldn't be there at all. A weather balloon tethered to a rusted fence post, its cord tangled with vines. It flaps weakly, caught in some breeze only it can feel. Historians still argue whether Soviet meteorological projects were used to mask secret radiation studies after the disaster. You don't touch the balloon. You don't even look at it too long. Instead, you step lightly and press on. Soon, the terrain shifts. You've wandered into the secret military installation known as Duga, also called the Russian woodpecker, for its infamous tapping sound that once echoed across global shortwave radio. Remember that annoying clicking you might have heard in old Cold War documentaries? Yeah, that was this place. A monstrous radar system, built to detect missile launches from the west. It towers above the trees like a steel rib cage stretching into the sky. Some call it Chernobyl's forgotten twin, the failed sibling, overshadowed by disaster. The Soviets poured millions into it, cloaked it in secrecy, and then buried its existence behind layers of denial and convenient omissions. You crane your neck up at its lattice of antennas, once humming with Cold War paranoia, now a rusted relic humming with bees and nesting birds. A conspiratorial whisper follows you here. Some claim Duga's signal interfered with aircraft, even with the minds of nearby villagers. Others say it was a mind control experiment gone awry, part of some MK Ultra-style shadow program. Is it true? Probably not. But in Chernobyl, the plausible and the paranormal share coffee. You climb a ladder partway up the Duga tower. Not far, just enough to feel like you're trespassing on a secret. The wind whistles through the hollow tubes, far below. The forest breathes. You feel strangely comforted by the height, as if being above it all offers a tiny reprieve from the poisoned earth. You sit. Again, you do a lot of sitting here. And strangely, the ground never seems to mind. Below, graffiti sprawls across a wall, a crude drawing of Lenin, holding a daisy instead of a book. Underneath, we were never told the truth. Back on the path, you find an old bunker, half buried and choked with ivy. Inside, the air is cool, the silence thick. There's a table with dusty blueprints, a decayed typewriter missing keys. You run your fingers over its surface and pause at a note, scribbled on brittle paper. Test logs lost. Request additional iodine. No one replies. Above ground again. You wander until you reach a long, skeletal bus stop on the road leading out of the zone. Faded murals depict children playing under cartoon suns, all bright colors and forced optimism. It feels grotesque now. Sunshine doesn't quite belong here. Still, you stand there a while, as if a bus might pull up and take you somewhere safer. Or stranger. Eventually, you turn and walk, not away, but deeper again. And then, just when you think the zone has no more mysteries, you reach a village few ever mention, Kopachi. This was one of the towns closest to Reactor No. 4. Most buildings were bulldozed and buried to contain the contamination. The only structures still standing are a kindergarten and a few half-sunken homes. You can see the edges of rooftops poking out of the ground like tombstones. You step into the kindergarten. The air smells of mold and varnish. Toy blocks lie scattered across the floor. A tricycle leans drunkenly in a corner. And on the chalkboard, still faint, still legible, is the Russian alphabet, written in a looping, practiced hand. You find a doll face down on a desk, her eyes forever shut. It's cliché. It's also real. This is where it gets hard, because you're not just looking at history anymore. You're stepping into the paused moment of someone's actual life. A juice cup, a picture book, a scribbled note to Mama. You sit down in a tiny chair, knees awkwardly high. The walls tilt slightly. The ceiling slumps. Through the broken window, grass has grown tall, brushing the sill. And you listen. To nothing. To everything. You wonder what it means. This act of preservation, is it morbid or sacred? Do we come to the zone to remember or to forget more efficiently? Even the term exclusion zone feels misleading. It's not truly excluded anymore. Scientists, Artists, tourists, influencers all visit now. There's even a growing argument about whether to designate the area as a kind of dark heritage site, a place where trauma is conserved for public education. Historians still argue whether this new fascination, this tourism of tragedy, is helpful or harmful. Is it awareness or exploitation? Is the selfie in front of a Ferris wheel a tribute or just another notch in the culture of clicks? The answer is unclear, but the silence? That, at least, is genuine. You make your way back along the gravel road as twilight deepens. The trees press in, quiet as always. The zone feels like it's watching you leave, not following, not beckoning, just watching. And as you pass the checkpoint once again, handing over your dosimeter and ID badge, you catch your own reflection in the glass. Your face is tired, a little paler than before, a little older, maybe. Behind you, the gate swings shut. You're out. But something about Chernobyl? It never quite lets you go. The road beyond the checkpoint stretches out in long, sleepy silence. You're technically out of the exclusion zone now, but the zone has a funny way of stretching itself into your thoughts like fog under a door frame. It lingers in the folds of your clothes, in the corners of your eyes when you blink, and most unsettling of all, it follows you in dreams. You're headed toward Slavutych now, the town built after the disaster to house displaced workers from Prypiat. It's a curious place, one of the youngest cities in Ukraine, and entirely Soviet in its ambition. An artificial utopia crafted at panic speed. A patchwork quilt of architectural styles. Each district was designed by architects from a different Soviet republic. You walk its clean, leafy boulevards and notice Georgian arches here. Baltic trim there. A bit of Armenian ornamentation further down. It's like the USSR's farewell letter to urban planning. In Slavutych, time doesn't quite behave. You see mothers pushing strollers and retirees feeding pigeons, but you also see power plant workers still boarding early morning buses that go back into the zone. Yes, people still work at Chernobyl. Not in the reactors, but in control, maintenance, decommissioning. They wear uniforms, they carry lunch boxes, they punch time clocks. There's a dark joke that Chernobyl is the world's most radioactive office job. And yet, for these people, it's normal, familiar, routine. You pass a man outside his flat, watering tomatoes in a bucket. He nods at you, cigarette perched in his mouth, and says something about the weather. You smile back, both of you pretending there isn't a partially melted nuclear core a few kilometers down the highway. Historians still argue whether Slavutych was a success or a slow concession to impossibility. It kept a workforce going. It provided homes, but it also prolonged the dependency on a site many thought should have been sealed away and left to crumble. You visit a museum tucked between some apartment blocks. Inside, there are faded photographs of the Prypiat wedding hall, a scale model of reactor Noah 4, and a locker with a hazmat suit hanging limp inside, like a sloughed-off second skin. One room plays a looped video of a young technician explaining evacuation procedures. He speaks calmly, with eyes that don't blink nearly enough. Nearby, there's a classroom recreated from the 1980s. Wooden desks, ink stains, a small Soviet flag on the teacher's desk. But unlike the one in Kopachi, this classroom is curated, sanitized. It smells like pledge, not mildew. You're supposed to be comfortable here. You aren't. You find yourself gravitating toward the part of the exhibit with the most mundane objects: a hairbrush, a glass milk bottle, a pair of woolen gloves. These things hit the hardest. Tragedy isn't just fire and alarms. It's forgetting to grab your gloves before you evacuate forever. Outside again. The evening comes soft and peach-colored. Slavutych is quiet in that way only Soviet towns can be. Disciplined and watchful. You buy a pastry from a kiosk and sit on a metal bench that hums with residual warmth from the day's sun. A dog trots past, then pauses, looking at you like it knows where you've been. Maybe it does. Tomorrow, you'll head east again, toward Belarus. But tonight is for sitting still, for noticing the rust on the playground swings, for hearing the hiss of tires on pavement. You open your phone and scroll. Social media is full of absurdities. Cat memes, avocado toast, someone arguing about whether milk goes in before the tea. You chuckle softly, the contrast hitting you full in the chest. A second later, you snap a photo of the sunset. Caption, "Evening in Slavutych. Ghosts not included." You almost post it, then don't. Instead, you walk again, past a mural of sunflowers, past an abandoned cinema with broken letters above the marquee, past a statue of a cosmonaut saluting the sky. The statue seems oddly defiant, or maybe hopeful. It's hard to tell in this light. As you turn the corner back to your hotel, you pass a fenced-off lot where teenagers are skateboarding. They laugh, fall, curse, try again. Life always finds a way to grow around cracks, even radioactive ones. And still, beneath it all, Chernobyl hums. There's an old Ukrainian folktale you remember suddenly, about a forest spirit that lives in abandoned places. It doesn't chase or scare or scream. It just watches, waiting to see if you'll stay long enough to hear what it wants to say. You lie in bed that night with your window cracked open. The air smells faintly metallic. A train whistle sounds in the distance. You roll onto your side and pull the blanket up to your chin. And just before sleep takes you, you think about the people who chose to stay. Not because they had to, but because the silence was familiar. Dawn slips into Slavutych like a secret. Light pooling gently across concrete balconies and flower beds arranged in symmetrical grids. You wake slowly, cocooned in the beige linens of a modest Soviet-era hotel room. There's a soft rattle from the pipes, the low groan of early commuters below, and a kettle in the corner clicking off, having boiled itself awake before you. You sip weak tea from a thin glass cup and stare out the window. Today you'll cross into Belarus, the invisible northern stretch of the fallout zone, often overshadowed in documentaries and disaster tours. But this half of the story is just as strange, just as silent, and arguably even more forgotten. The drive takes you along flat roads lined with skeletal trees. The farther north you go, the fewer houses you see. Eventually, even the utility poles vanish, and the sky seems too big for the landscape beneath it. A few storks nest on abandoned chimneys. They don't seem bothered. Soon, you reach the Policy State Radio-Ecological Reserve, a sprawling, uninhabited area of forest and marshland covering over 800 square miles. It was created by Belarus in the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster. A kind of accidental nature reserve born not from conservation, but contamination. It's one of the most radioactive areas in Belarus, and it's completely off-limits to civilians. Well, mostly. You're here with a guide. He doesn't wear a hazmat suit, just sturdy boots, a windbreaker, and a knowing look. His Geiger counter hangs from his belt like a pocket watch from some alternate reality. As you step into the reserve, a wild quiet greets you. No construction noise, no phone signals, just the occasional rustle of wildlife and the soft crunch of your footsteps on mossy soil. Oddly enough, the place is bursting with life. Deer, elk, wild boar, even wolves. Nature, left to its own devices, seems shockingly unconcerned about radiation. While humans fled, the animals remained and then multiplied. The so-called Chernobyl exclusion zones have become some of the most unexpected rewilding success stories on Earth. Historians still argue whether the radiation's long-term genetic effects outweigh the ecological benefits of human absence. Some studies suggest birth defects. Others show robust, thriving populations. And then, of course, there are the horses. You spot one through the trees, stocky, shaggy, built like a tank with a mane. The Przewalski's horse, once nearly extinct, now reintroduced into the wild here to roam freely. You watch it graze near a collapsed farmhouse, its hooves silent on the loamy earth. It doesn't even glance at you. It's strange, isn't it? That the world's worst nuclear accident accidentally gave nature a kind of sanctuary. No roads, no chainsaws, no tourists, except a few strange souls like you. Further into the reserve, you reach the ruins of a village named Babchin, just a few crumbling houses, the faint outline of a garden, and a well now choked with leaves. A porcelain teacup lies in the grass, its floral design mostly intact. The sky is gray now, the wind slow and lazy. Your guide points to an old beehive under a collapsed awning. Beekeepers lived here, he says softly. The honey still comes up radioactive. Tastes fine, though. You chuckle, then hesitate. Is he joking? He shrugs. Maybe. You sit on a stone, letting your thoughts drift. This part of Belarus was hit hard by the Chernobyl fallout. Some towns received more radioactive iodine than parts of Ukraine. But the international press mostly focused on Prypiat and reactor number 4, and the Belarusian pain was quietly filed away. No HBO series, no themed tours. Still, the scars remain. You pass a sign warning of contamination zones, then another, and then one that's been taken over by ivy and woodpecker holes, barely legible. The land is absorbing its trauma like an old scar, still there, but no longer bleeding. At lunch, you sit beside a shallow pond. The water's surface is still as glass. A frog croaks somewhere out of sight. Your sandwich is cold, slightly smashed, and utterly delicious in the middle of nowhere. You think of the thousands of people who once lived here. Farmers, teachers, midwives, radio DJs. One story your guide shares stays with you. A woman named Klavdia, born in 1933, who refused to leave after the evacuation order. She told reporters in the 1990s, "If I die here, I die at home. And I've always wanted to haunt this place anyway." Solid logic, really. You imagine her in a cottage surrounded by apple trees, a headscarf tied tight, stirring jam in a pot while radiation dust settles softly outside. A stubborn ghost with strong opinions and excellent pickles. Evening begins to slide in early this far north. The sky turns bruised purple, and the air smells faintly of pine needles and damp earth. You cross a small bridge where moss creeps over the edges like frosting on a forgotten cake. Below, a trickle of water flows eastward, directionless and patient. You think about how much of the world is shaped by stories we stop telling. Who remembers these towns? These trees? These horses with their prehistoric eyes? You do. Now, at least. And when you look back over your shoulder one last time, you don't see an empty land. You see a quiet one. And maybe, just maybe, quiet is not the same thing as lost. You wake in a cabin just outside the Polsey Reserve, one of the few places still permitted for overnight stays. The wood-paneled walls smell like old pine, and the floor creaks beneath your feet as you step into the morning air. It's chilly, clean, and feels like you're standing at the edge of a story that isn't quite finished. Today's path leads away from forest and ghost villages and towards something even stranger. The Duga radar. You first hear about it from your guide over breakfast, between bites of rye bread and pickled cucumber. "Ah, the woodpecker," he says, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the table. Boom, 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 all through the Cold War. And just like that, you're intrigued. The Duga radar is a massive over-the-horizon Soviet system built to detect incoming missiles from the United States. It stretches nearly 500 feet high and over half a mile long, rising out of the forest like a rusted skeleton of a giant, long-dead creature. When you finally see it, your breath catches. The structure looms, impossibly tall, each metal beam weathered but intact. It's not graceful. It's not sleek. It looks like something humanity should not have been able to build. Like a ladder welded straight into the sky. You stand in its shadow, your head tilted back until your neck aches. This is not some quiet village or empty schoolroom. This is Soviet ambition at its most audacious, military, secretive, and deeply strange. And for years, people had no idea it existed. In fact, on maps, the radar was disguised as a children's summer camp, which, frankly, is terrifying in its own way. Imagine showing up to Camp Duga with your swim trunks and a juice box, only to find miles of fencing and a structure that looks like it might broadcast signals to the moon. Between 1976 and 1989, shortwave radio operators around the world reported strange, repetitive tapping sounds, fast, mechanical, and relentless. It sounded like a woodpecker. Hence the nickname. No one could figure out where it was coming from, until they did. And even then, the Soviet Union wouldn't confirm it. Historians still argue whether the Duga radar ever actually worked. Some claim it was plagued with false positives and technical issues from the beginning. Others argue it was a marvel of over-the-horizon detection, and that it served its purpose perfectly. Just not the one anyone expected. Theories abound. Some believe it was part of a Soviet mind control experiment. Others say it was used to jam Western communications. A few say it broadcast coded messages to spies embedded abroad. And one charmingly paranoid fringe theory insists it was trying to contact something. Not human. You press your hand against one of the corroded beams. It's cold, solid, humming with wind. Beneath the radar structure, the control rooms still exist. Low-slung concrete bunkers with peeling paint, broken glass, and that familiar scent of damp neglect. Old machines lie scattered like forgotten toys. Some buttons still have labels. You resist the urge to press one. Barely. You find a rusted sign near the entrance. Glory to the Soviet radar troops. Catchy. As you explore, your guide points out an underground network that connected the radar base to Chernobyl itself. Secret corridors, fiber lines, secure communications. This was not a standalone outpost. It was woven into the heartbeat of the zone. Ironically, when the reactor blew in 1986, Duga was barely affected. Built to withstand war, it was apparently also sturdy enough to survive nuclear catastrophe. But with the collapse of the USSR just a few years later, it was eventually abandoned. Now, it sits here, a relic of a vanished empire. You sit down near its base and eat a sandwich you packed that morning. There's a certain peace to the place, in that haunted industrial way. No sounds but birds, wind, and the soft clatter of distant trees brushing metal. It would make an excellent villain lair in a James Bond movie, or maybe it already did, and the world just forgot. There's a story about a group of teenage explorers who climbed to the very top of the Duga structure years ago. Took them over an hour, each rung slippery with rain and age. When they reached the summit, they said the whole forest seemed to curve away beneath them like a map. One of them wrote, "I felt like I could see all the places history tried to bury." You think about that as you walk away. How the radar was built to see the future, but now it only remembers the past. How the woodpecker's signal has stopped tapping, but the echoes are still out there, hidden in old recordings and conspiracy forums. And how sometimes the most important parts of history are the ones nobody meant to leave behind. As the afternoon light begins to fade, you find yourself staring up at the towering antenna again. It almost seems like it's listening, or waiting, or maybe it just doesn't care. Not everything that watches you back has eyes. There's a faint vibration underfoot as the train pulls out of Slavutych station. A slow, metallic lullaby that rocks you gently backward into the story you've been unraveling for days. You rest your head against the smudged glass window, and the forests glide past in silence. You're heading back toward Kiev, away from the exclusion zone, the Duga radar, and the howling quiet of forgotten towns. But the journey isn't over, because even far from the reactor's shadow, the ghosts of Chernobyl follow in strange and subtle ways. Take the strange case of the Chernobyl mushrooms. In a drab research lab near Kiev, teams of scientists have been growing fungi harvested from inside Reactor 4, fungi that, for reasons still being studied, appear to eat radiation. No, really. They're called radiotrophic fungi, and instead of being harmed by the radioactive environment, they thrive in it. These odd little organisms don't just survive. They absorb ionizing radiation and convert it into chemical energy. It's not quite photosynthesis. It's something more uncanny. And yes, NASA has taken samples of these fungi into space. Scientists are researching whether these organisms could one day help protect astronauts from cosmic radiation during long-haul trips to Mars. You try not to imagine glowing mushrooms quietly muttering in Latin on the International Space Station. Now, as the train hums toward the capital, you look around the cabin. A boy plays with a toy train on the seat across from you. His grandmother snoozes next to him, head bobbing slightly with the motion. She's wearing a patterned scarf, the kind you've seen on so many of the older women in villages around the zone. You wonder where she was in April 1986. The people of Ukraine, Belarus, and parts of Russia carry a memory you can't always see. But it's there. In birth defects still being tracked, in lawsuits still unresolved, and in stories passed down like folk songs. You recall the tales of the liquidators, the hundreds of thousands of soldiers, miners, engineers, and everyday citizens who helped contain the disaster in the first weeks and months. Some were celebrated, most were forgotten, and many were lost. Historians still argue how many liquidators died from exposure, and how many others carried long-term effects, autoimmune diseases, cancers, thyroid conditions. Estimates range wildly, and official figures remain suspiciously low. You glance down at your hands, your wrists, the skin under your sleeves. Nothing glows. But you've been there, walked those roads, breathed that air, touched rusted metal. And though you're fine now, you start to understand what it means to live in the aftermath of a silent, invisible enemy. The train slows. Kiev emerges on the horizon like a slightly rumpled blanket of steel and concrete. You check into a small guest house tucked beside a cobblestone street. It's warm inside, clean, smells like coffee and floor polish. Your host offers you borscht and a shy smile. When you mention you've come from the Chernobyl zone, she raises her eyebrows. "Ah," she says softly. "You've seen the quiet country." Later, as evening falls, you visit a museum that few tourists seem to notice, the Ukrainian National Chernobyl Museum. It's not flashy. Fluorescent lighting, cardboard displays, plastic badges in glass cases, but it's heavy in a different way. The artifacts aren't meant to impress. They're meant to remain. You wander past a melted clock, a firefighter's uniform, a doll's head scorched on one side, and over each display hangs a black and white photo of a town that no longer exists, or exists only on paper. Veliki Les, Orevici, Yanov. You run your fingers along the glass. Each name feels like a breath held too long. In the center of the museum is a replica of the iconic Angel Bridge, a structure used by liquidators to cross dangerously irradiated areas. Beneath it, photographs of the men who crossed it, many of whom died young. And then there's the Wall of Memory. Thousands of portraits, candlelit and somber. You pause in front of one. He looks like someone you might have seen buying cigarettes, or teaching shop class, or whistling badly while fixing a leaky pipe. Just a man. But for a few weeks in 1986, he was something else. A barrier, a sacrifice. You step outside, Kiev is glowing, but not with radiation. Just street lamps and phone screens and a soft drizzle on the pavement. It's a normal city on a normal night. But the shadow of the zone still hums beneath it. In your dreams that night, You hear tapping, like a woodpecker, or maybe just your heart. The rain has passed by morning. Outside your guesthouse window, Kiev stretches wide and gray, all trolley wires and stoic apartment blocks. You wrap yourself in a borrowed coat and step outside, past street vendors selling roasted chestnuts, past crumbling statues with ivy clinging to their chins. You're heading today into another corner of the aftermath, not the zone itself, not the ashes or the science, but something more cultural, more human, because Chernobyl didn't just scar the land. It etched itself into art, into myth, into the everyday language of fear. And nowhere is that clearer than in the stories. You start at a small theater tucked between two banks on a back street. They're rehearsing a play called Fourth Reactor, a semi-fictional account of a firefighter's final hours during the meltdown. There's no stage lighting yet, just a man in a Soviet uniform delivering his lines to empty chairs. "Tell my mother not to wash the uniform," he says softly. It's not safe. He's sweating, shaking, standing still. And somehow, even with no audience but you, the scene lands with the force of a dropped anvil. You sit through the whole rehearsal, stunned by its quiet reverence. Back outside, you find Chernobyl in murals too. One on the side of a post office shows an angel in a gas mask, wings made of iodine tablets. Another, down by the underpass, shows a reactor core as a blooming red flower. The city breathes around the disaster like it's part of its DNA. In bookstores, you notice something odd. A whole shelf labeled Zone Literature. You thumb through titles, memoirs from evacuees, photo essays of rusted playgrounds, even speculative fiction about mutant foxes who speak in riddles and guide lost souls to safety. One thin paperback simply reads, May 1986. It's a collection of diary entries from children who lived in Prypiat. Some are heartbreakingly normal. Mom made soup again, and some are haunting. One 10-year-old writes, "They said we would come back in 3 days, so I didn't feed my hamster." You put the book back carefully, as if afraid to wrinkle the past. Historians still argue whether these cultural echoes honor the memory of Chernobyl or exploit it, whether fictionalizing the trauma helps people understand it, or simply makes it into another Netflix binge. And, well, that brings you to the show. Yes, that show. You stream the miniseries Chernobyl from your laptop later that evening, curled in bed with a plate of cookies that taste like dry concrete, but were made with care. The series is powerful, cinematic, brutal. You can't stop watching. The graphite glow, the breathless panic, the courtroom monologues. You think about the real people, how their names were changed, how some were reduced to symbols. And yet, it sticks with you. Not just because of the horror, but because of the quiet, the long silences between lines, the shots of empty rooms still holding their breath. That's what the zone feels like. After the final credits roll, you stare at the ceiling, thinking, Chernobyl has become more than a place. It's a metaphor now, a mood, a setting, a warning. People use the word casually. "Oh, this kitchen is Chernobyl," someone mutters when the microwave explodes. Online, you've seen jokes and memes, sometimes wildly insensitive, sometimes weirdly poignant. A cat with glowing eyes, a man wearing a colander labeled radiation suit. It's strange how disaster becomes aesthetic. You think about the Instagram tourists, the ones who sneak into the zone, pose on rusted Ferris wheels, filter the photo just right. It's unsettling. But you also wonder, are they really any different from you? You came here, too. You wandered the roads. You touched the railings. You wrote notes in a journal like you were the first to witness the dust. You want to believe your curiosity is respectful, that listening closely isn't the same as gawking. That silence is a kind of tribute. And maybe it is. You sit by your window and look at the skyline. Kiev is vibrant tonight. Some club nearby plays synth music that pulses through the bricks. Couples laugh below, wrapped in scarves and winter breath. But somewhere out there, just a few hours' drive away. The red forest remains poisoned. The school books still lie open on desks. The dog tags of liquidators still rest in rusted drawers. It's not over. Not really. And the strangest part? There's something beautiful in the way this memory refuses to fade. Chernobyl is no longer just a warning. It's a canvas, a shrine, a whisper passed between generations. You think back to that little girl's diary. I didn't feed my hamster. That one sentence hits harder than 1,000 statistics. So you close the curtains, turn off the lights, and let the darkness feel like something sacred. Not scary, because in that space between fear and forgetting, history waits, morning again. And this time the air has that fresh-washed scent that only cities get after a long, silent drizzle. The sun peeks between buildings like it's apologizing for being late. You wrap your scarf a little tighter and set off for your final stretch of research, if you can even call it that anymore. This isn't about notes or footage now. It's about closure, about asking the one question no guidebook really answers. What does Chernobyl mean now? Not to the tourists, not to the scientists, not even to the mushroom-eating fungi, but to the people who still live in its shadow. You head west, toward the town of Korostin, a quiet, unassuming city just outside the exclusionary hot zones. It was hit by the radioactive cloud back in 1986, and while it wasn't evacuated, it was undeniably changed. You meet Natalia at a cafe that serves pelmeni on chipped porcelain. She's in her 50s now. Gray streaks in her ponytail, and a voice like gravel soaked in honey. She pours you tea before you can even sit. "You came from the zone?" she asks. You nod. She nods back, as if you've just said you came from your cousin's wedding. No surprise, no awe, just familiarity. She was 16 in 1986. "I remember the taste in the air," she tells you, stirring her cup without drinking. "Like metal, like licking a battery. We didn't know why. No one told us. We were still planting potatoes." You ask her when she first heard the word Chernobyl. 3 days later, she says. "We heard it from a man on the bus who'd been in Kiev. They closed the windows, told us not to drink the milk." Historians still argue whether the Soviet delay in informing citizens was simple bureaucracy or willful negligence. Probably both, Natalia shrugs. "I washed my hair in rainwater that week." She laughs. You don't. Later, she takes you to her sister's house. They show you a wedding album, ceremonies from the 80s and 90s, big dresses and tiny bouquets, everyone smiling. You notice something subtle. All the outdoor photos are cloudy. Not bad photography. Just filtered somehow. Like the air itself was different. Natalia's niece joins you. She's a teacher now. Her students study Chernobyl as part of their standard curriculum. She pulls out one of their art projects, drawings of animals in the zone. Some are scientific, some are wild-eyed fantasies. All of them are somehow beautiful. "They're not afraid of it," she says. "They're just curious." You ask her if people still talk about the zone like a warning. She smiles. "We talk about it like a storm, like something that happened, not something that's coming." Back in your room that night, you open your notebook. Your fingers hesitate. What do you write when the silence speaks for itself? You try anyway. Words like resilience and memory feel too heavy, too clean. You settle for, "Chernobyl is not over, but it is not everything." You underline it twice. The next morning, you take a long walk along the edge of town, where the apartment blocks fade into muddy fields and stray dogs lope silently through puddles. One stops to stare at you. Its fur is patchy, its eyes are mismatched, and somehow, it looks just like every other survivor you've seen. Scarred, cautious, still standing. You crouch, hold out your hand. It doesn't come, but it doesn't run either, just watches. Like the zone itself, later that afternoon, you pass a monument you hadn't noticed before. Small, almost hidden, beside a grove of pine. It's a simple stone pillar engraved with 2 words. "To remain." No names, no dates, just that. And you think, maybe that's the real legacy of Chernobyl. Not the numbers, not the mutations, not even the reactor, but the people, the forests, the dogs, the stories, the sound of a train on an overgrown track. To remain, to persist, even after everything, even in the silence. That night, as you lie awake in the quiet hum of your room, you reflect on everything you've absorbed, the science, the stories, the sorrow, and the stubbornness of life itself. The kind of life that pushes through cracked asphalt and broken promises. The life that refuses to be erased. Your mind drifts back to that patch of red forest, glowing faintly in your memory, where every tree was a silent testament to catastrophe. You think of the ghost town of Prypiat, its empty streets echoing with invisible footsteps, playgrounds forever frozen in playtime. And yet, amid the ruins, there's a strange kind of beauty. You realize that Chernobyl has become a mirror, reflecting not just the horrors of nuclear disaster, but also the quiet resilience of nature and humanity. The zone is both a scar and a sanctuary, a paradox that historians still debate whether it symbolizes ultimate failure or surprising hope. Tomorrow, you'll head back to Kiev, but tonight, you let yourself sink deeper into this twilight world between memory and myth. You imagine the liquidators, those unsung heroes whose names you may never know, standing in their protective suits, eyes bright with fatigue and determination. You imagine children reading their diary entries, people painting murals, musicians composing songs inspired by silent reactors. And you wonder how stories, these fragile threads, are the true power that keeps history alive. Before sleep pulls you under, you whisper a quiet thank you to the city, the forest, the air that still carries a hint of metal and mystery. Because you're part of this story now, and it will never let you go.